collaboration with the Cyprus Mail, this is the Cyprus News Digest with Rosie Haralambous.
Coming up on the programme this week, we get some forthright opinions from one of Nicosia's leading lawyers about the pushback of refugees from Lebanon.
The government should give a fair, speedy, effective system to process applications, because there are people who are genuine refugees and there are people who are not. The point is, you cannot make that call in the middle of the ocean just by looking at the color of the skin of the people you're dealing with. That is not on.
And we visit a dementia support centre in Nicosia.
They feel happy when they come here because they have other people, company, he helps to the social thing, but because they stay home and alone.
We've seen a lot in the news recently about Cyprus pushing back, they say, the refugees and asylum seekers and, yes, economic migrants coming over from Lebanon. Well, is it legal? There was a full-page article earlier this week in the Cyprus Mail, penned by leading Nicosia lawyer Achilleas Dimitriadis, who joins us now. Achilleas, you seem to think, according to that article, that it is definitely illegal for Cyprus to do this. Why?
Yes, I think so. I think pushing back these boats on the high seas is unacceptable. It is contrary to the law, and when I say law, we need to define it, because it's a bit more complicated than this simple answer that you shouldn't be doing this. There are at least three levels of law that are applicable. The first is the international human rights. The second is the European human rights law. And the third is the EU acquis, the law that we get from Brussels, as that is enacted through our Cypriot refugee law that has been in place and that has been amended in order to comply with EU norms. So let's start with the international human rights. One can look at the Geneva Convention relating to the status of refugees. It's a very old convention in 1951, and there's been a protocol in 1967. The Republic of Cyprus is bound by this convention, and essentially this convention does not allow the expulsion of aliens or the prevention of people who are refugees. So that's the international aspect. Now let's go one level down, which is the European human rights. There are provisions in the European Convention of Human Rights that is applicable to Cyprus, which does not allow the collective expulsion of aliens, which is this kind of activity. And then the simplest approach is the Cyprus law, as the EU acquis has been enacted, and I won't bore you with all the directives and regulations about it, but I can tell you that there are enough provisions in the law to make the government accept the need to have some sort of effective procedure which would segregate the people who are real refugees and are essentially asking for asylum from people who are economic migrants, which is a very different category, and of course they need help, but it's a very different approach that you have to do. And the Cyprus government has to give them a chance to apply. The trick, if I may use the expression, is that if they do apply, then they cannot be chucked out, as it were, until the procedure is fulfilled. And the reason we're having problems is that the asylum service, or the service dealing with this matter, is very slow in dealing with the applications. And there was a refugee authority that was also reviewing these applications, which again was rather slow in dealing with these cases. So there is a backlog. Because of a backlog, there is delay. And because of the delay, many people who shouldn't have been here are kept here because they have this breathing space. So the problem, if I may use it, if I may define it in that way, is that our system set up on the island is not effective, is not efficient, and is not quick enough. And because of the bottleneck that has been created, we have a spillover with people who are not being given what they are allowed under both EU law, under EU human rights, and under international human rights.
Basically, it seems that what we're doing is saying, sorry, we're full up, go away. And they're not allowed to do that.
Exactly. We're not even saying, sorry, we're full up. We're not even checking who these people are. And that, I think, is the wrong that the government is doing.
Yes, particularly since a lot of people who have been living in Lebanon for the last several years are actually refugees from Syria. Lebanon's got about the highest refugee population in the world, I think. So what is the legal situation if a Syrian who has been displaced and been hand-to-mouth living in Lebanon until this last disaster with that blast now finds that he can't even keep his family? If he tries to come from Lebanon here, is he still classed as a Syrian refugee, or is his status slightly different because, as in the EU with the Lisbon Treaty, you know, where you land from and where you go to is a different thing?
Well, the point here is that these people are on European soil, and part of the European soil is also the territorial waters of the Republic of Cyprus. So that's European soil, if one can use the expression. And if it is such, the EU acquis applies, which gives you all these benefits and all these benefits for refugees and obligations for the state to allow people who claim to be refugees their day in court. That is essentially what these people are asking.
So is there a difference between a boat that's pushed back before it reaches Cyprus territorial waters or not?
Well, one could argue that if it's on the high seas, that would be different. But there comes the effect of the United Nations Convention.
And there's a moral and ethical argument.
The moral and ethical I won't even discuss. I mean, for me, it's so obvious that morally and ethically you cannot allow people in the middle of the ocean to be left abandoned, and you must render assistance. But this technical point, I think, can also be overcome because of the UN Convention, which applies to all countries. And I would not really make this distinction. The distinction is there for the EU acquis, for the law that comes out of Brussels. But I think we have enough norms of international law that would allow this protection even on the high seas. And again, I'm not even sure where these people are being stopped and pushed away. So I really don't know the geographics of where this thing is taking place.
But we're assuming that if they did actually set foot on the island, they should then at least be allowed to claim asylum?
Not just set foot on the island, but set foot on the boat that belongs to the government. The boat, the police boat that is carrying out these activities, if they take on the refugees, that is soil of the Republic, because the boat has a legal system that goes with it, and in the case of a Cyprus flag, it's the Cyprus law that is applicable, which again is European law. So if they actually board the police vessel, then that would give jurisdiction, real jurisdiction, to the courts and the law from Cyprus. And the government should give a fair, speedy, effective system to process applications, because there are people who are genuine refugees and there are people who are not. The point is, you cannot make that call in the middle of the ocean just by looking at the color of the skin of the people you're dealing with. That is not on.
I find it also a little bit ironic that the last time things blew up, as it were, in Lebanon, Cyprus was out there telling the world, we're taking them in, we sent boats to get people off, we brought everybody back to Larnaca, the hotels were full, weren't we wonderful? And yet, if there's a Lebanese national on any of these boats, it's go home.
Well, it's go home. I mean, I think there was a monetary issue in the example you have said at the time. I think there was an obvious monetary advantage for the economy for taking these people in, where there seems to be none now. But if we're going to talk economics, I think both the UN and mostly the EU have both resources and, to my understanding, willingness to assist with this problem. We are a frontline state. We are the gateway to the European Union. We have to protect the EU borders, and the EU is helping us. both in processing and setting these people up, and even to some extent receiving these refugees if they have been found to be such. So it's not a question that they're not helping. I think it's a question of us being organized. And if one were to look at the trend of refugees coming from 2016 onwards, I think the message was loud and clear. Obviously, we missed it. We haven't been preparing ourselves. And I think lately we have also added some perhaps internal political issues to cover up this or blur the issue from other matters that have come to the surface, and perhaps we're trying to divert attention by this kind of xenophobic approach that is being administered by the government. I think the way this has been handled is not how I would have liked it to be handled as a human rights lawyer. I think, first of all, we have to be human, and of course we have to look at the law, but some humanity in the way you deal with fellow humans is required, and logic doesn't always come to mind when they deal with it in the way that we've seen.
There does seem to have been a hardening of attitude in the current government over the last 6 months or so. We've seen the excuse of the pandemic used to corral refugees and asylum seekers into tented camps that are not properly set up. Now we're pushing people back. And yet it seems that it's almost a populist policy, because a lot of Cypriots here seem to be supporting this. And I find that a little bit extraordinary when we think that back in 1974, a lot of the population of Cyprus found itself displaced, internally displaced, and many of them chose to travel abroad and were welcomed and sheltered.
Yes.
And can you explain that to me?
Well, it's ironic, to say the least. I mean, in 1974, people had to leave, and countries received them as refugees, even though technically speaking, as you rightly pointed out, they were displaced in the sense that there was no crossing of international border, and that's how you define a refugee. But when these people went abroad, countries took them up, gave them jobs and helped them out, which is something we should have been more sensitive about. But I think the government has used the coronavirus situation as an excuse for doing various things. For example, the excuse that there are issues of health in relation to the people coming in. Well, then what about all the airports that we're getting all the tourists and the testing that we're doing there? So I don't think testing is really the issue. I think there's something behind this. And again, the government hasn't been very nice to its own nationals. Let me remind you, in March of this year, the government decided that our youth, our students, would not be allowed to return on the island because allegedly they were a threat to the public health, and they blocked out students. About 10,000, 12,000 people were left stranded in England and in other countries, and they were not allowed in. So this unruly, if I may use, behavior that the Cyprus government has been exhibiting is not only directed to refugees, it was directed to its own nationals and especially its youth. I think they should pull themselves together, get their act together, and start looking at what assistance we can get from the European Union, how we can humanely deal with these people who, irrespective of their status, at the end of the day, are people just like us.
Indeed. And let's also talk, if we may, about the possibility of appealing, because I believe that the KISA NGO here has advised some of the people who were pushed back that they can appeal to the European Court of Human Rights on the basis of all the things you said at the beginning of this
all
chat.
All the legal jargon I use, there are two issues. One, can they appeal, and if they can, have they fulfilled the procedural requirements? I think there is an argument to be made in applying directly to the European Court of Human Rights, saying that there are no effective domestic remedies because of the delay that is happening, or because they are not allowing people to land on the island so as to find somebody to make the application to. So complete denial of access to a legal system to determine your status is, I think, a very good ground to go directly to the European Court of Human Rights, because normally you have to exhaust domestic remedies. You have to go to the local courts, give the local courts the chance to decide, and if the decision does not meet your expectations, then you can go to Strasbourg.
Well, then you can appeal, and let's talk about that, because they have just cut
Exactly.
the time frame within which you can appeal if your application for asylum is turned down.
That's right.
To, is it 10 days? Now, do tell me who could, especially if they're a foreigner on the island, possibly with not great language skills, certainly not Greek, possibly some English, find a lawyer who would take on your case and get it, what you say, put into the court in that period of time.
Okay, let's put the facts down. The facts are that under the Constitution, any administrative recourse allows you 75 days from the time you found out about it. So if there is a problem and that the government does not do what you thought they should be doing, you have 75 days from the moment the objection or dismissal has been communicated to you. In their infinite wisdom, the government has applied to the House to shorten that period, and I understand it's gone down either to 15 or to 30 days. I'm not sure what exactly has happened, because there was a distinction between cases that were clearly inadmissible and others that had to be looked at more seriously. But the fact of the matter is that the period of 70 days has been shortened either to 15 or 30 for these applications. And I think that this is a clear discrimination on the basis of the ethnic origin or even religion or status of people.
Sorry,
Now,
just let's clarify, make sure I understood what you're saying. This reduction in the time allowed applies only to certain cases, or if I have a court case that goes against me and I want to appeal, do I also have to?
No. This 75 days is for administrative action. So if, say, you apply to the government for some benefit and they said no to you, you still have your 75 days. But if the application relates to the refugee status, to the asylum status, then they have shortened this period either to 15 or 30 for people to make a judicial review, having secured a negative decision from the refugee service.
Is that legal to separate
yeah.
two different types of cases and
Right.
make the rules
Well,
different for different people?
That's the point. I think that constitutes discrimination, and that's probably why one of the reasons that the NGO you have mentioned, GISA, will apply to the Strasbourg court, because this is clearly a discriminatory treatment to people. And just to make things worse, the administrative court, the Court for International Protection, as they call it, which has been set up, has also the possibility of rehearing the case, which means that you can add information that you failed to give up when you just landed and make your original application. So in that respect, it's advisable to get legal assistance. And in order to get legal assistance and put together all the facts, as well as these extra facts that you perhaps found out that were relevant and you need to put them in, clearly this reduction of time doesn't serve that purpose. And I think that it shouldn't be allowed.
Do you think anything will be done to change all these measures? I mean, how could they be changed if, for example, the Strasbourg court did come back and say, yes, this is totally illegal? Have we got to completely go through Parliament again?
Well, if Strasbourg comes on the side we are advocating and explaining, that is, that these acts are illegal, then a decision of the court will have to be implemented by the Republic of Cyprus, and the Committee of Ministers, which is the body that supervises the execution of the judgments, will make sure that they will do it. I think that judgments of the European Court against Cyprus are usually executed, and I think the Cyprus government will have to rectify the wrong that it has done by pushing people back or by lowering the time that they would be allowed to apply for a review of a negative decision.
And how long does it take for decisions to come out of the European Court of Human Rights?
Well, it takes some time. Unless they've applied for extraordinary measures, it's an emergency application that you can file. I don't know the details, I just read about it. But I'd say anything between 6 to 12 months is what these things last.
So, on the basis that you might as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb, I assume that means that we can continue to push back. And we're trying to make an arrangement, I think, as well with the Lebanese government
that's also
to do
important.
this. So we could carry on doing this for a year or more and then hope that things calm down slightly, and in the meantime we don't really need to do much about it.
Well, I've seen articles in the press that UNHCR has come very clearly against this. I think the asylum service in the European Union will most likely come and make adverse comments, to say the least, about this activity that is going on. But then again, don't forget that we're getting into an election period. We have a parliamentary election in May, so everybody's gearing up for that. So I don't think it is unrelated to the fact that elections are coming up, and perhaps people are approaching this with a more populist agenda rather than a more human rights type of approach.
You don't look very optimistic.
No, I'm not. No, this kind of activity, normally the state has the upper hand, but there is justice at the end of the road. Unfortunately, it takes some time to get there, and more unfortunate, people suffer in the meantime when they shouldn't be suffering more by having a recipient state deal with them in this inhuman way.
That is Achilleas Dimitriades, leading Nicosia lawyer, and I'm sure you can find his article online. It was published in Wednesday's Cyprus Mail.
Keep up to date with events in Cyprus and around the world with the Cyprus News Digest.
We've just recently had World Alzheimer's Month, and we're joined this week on the programme by the director of the Ithaki Centre in Nicosia. It deals with daycare services for people suffering from dementia. He is Eftichios Christofidis, and he joins us now. Eftichios, this place, I think, follows on from a centre in Limassol that's been operating for a while. You only opened in February, and then, of course, came the pandemic. So, are you back open now? I presume things have had to be changed somewhat.
Yes, we had opened in February, but with the pandemic, we have to close for 3 months. We open again at end of June, and we're working normally until now. With all this we have to do with coronavirus,
social distancing and all of that. Does that mean you've had to cut the number of people you can help?
We cut the number of people. Before we had 8 or 9 person each group. Now we have 5 or 6 person. Before people comes every day. Now 2 or 3 times in a week.
You're doing the best you can, obviously, under difficult circumstances. But the numbers you speak of is obviously nowhere near the number of people who could use these services in Nicosia. Do we have any idea how many people in Nicosia, for example, or even across Cyprus, are diagnosed with some form of dementia?
We don't know exactly how many people we have in Cyprus. Maybe there is 15 or 20,000 people in Cyprus. We know that in over the world there is 15 million people. In Europe, 11, 12 million. In Greece, 200,000.
Right, I ask you that because this sort of facility is relatively new in Cyprus, I think. What happens to people when they are diagnosed with dementia? How are they cared for within our healthcare and welfare system?
Dementia is not something you change from one day to another. It's very slowly, and the first thing we look for is the memory, the shortest memory. But day after day, the problem is looking bigger.
But if you look at other countries and the way they deal with this, when a person demonstrates those early stages of dementia, there are methodologies in the home that, for example, a husband or wife can do. Putting labels onto cupboards in the kitchen to say what's in there. Putting labels on doors that this is the bathroom and these sort of things. Do we do that here? Have we got any organisation that helps with that?
We do this. There is many carers coming to us and ask, what can I do for this? And we have many lessons and we can help them.
So do you have actual programs here for the carers of dementia sufferers
we have.
to, if you like, train them in best practice?
Yes, that's exactly we do. We're training the carers and with seminars and with sessions, and we can train how to care better the dementia patient.
The resident psychologist at the centre is Rafaela Stefanidou. Rafaela, just outline for us the sort of things you do. We're sitting in this room and I see lots of exercise bikes and things like that. So physical exercise is obviously important. But how do you structure the group's session when they're here for what, 2-3 hours?
Actually, it's 3 hours and 4. Here is people in the morning. We start from what time is it, what day is it, the month. After we start an exercise about their memory, exercise about memory, exercise about the focus. We play games to help you with the memory. Also, we play games or do exercise in the paper to exercise the memory and also the thinking.
Do you ask them things like, what did you do yesterday? Because they can always remember what they did when they were 16, 17 years old, I think, but not always what they did yesterday.
We ask them, but they never answered correct. We answered, you sleep well last night? And they answered, I think so, maybe. I feel well. I'm tired now.
The most important thing, I suppose, is that they feel that they're getting something out of their visits here and that they feel happy. Generally speaking, I think they do.
They feel happy when they come here because they have other people. Company, he helps to the social thing, but because they stay home alone or stay home with the husband or with another lady who helps in the work at home. So here they feel happy because they have something to do.
So you've done the exercises, you've done the games, and I see that you've got a ghetto blaster there. Does that mean that they do singing and dancing?
Dancing, no, because it's dangerous. But we sing, they put an old song.
And when you've had somebody coming here regularly for a month or two, do you notice a difference? Because dementia isn't something you can slow down, really, is it?
Yes, but their daughter or their husband come here and tell us, I feel better because my husband or my mother is more happy, remembers more.
So they do notice a difference, the people who are living with them on a daily basis. Eftichios Christofidis and Rafaela Stefanidou from the Ithaki Centre in Nicosia. And you can find out more about the work of the centres in Nicosia and Limassol at Ithaki Charity Organisation on Facebook and their website ithakicyprus.com. Well, that about wraps up this edition of the Cyprus News Digest. Many thanks for your company. Hope you'll join me next week. Till we meet again, take care and God bless. Bye-bye now.